Hello, everybody, and welcome to TFT, Tinfoil Talk. My name is Jesse C. Busby III, and I welcome you to our conversations today. And today we are talking about Antarctica. And boy, you would think such a frozen wasteland would have nothing interesting to talk about it, but oh boy, does it. The amount
Oh,
of
it does.
mysteries, oh yes, mysteries and stuff abound with the Antarctic continent. And there are many things to talk about in many different directions, actually. It's not just one or the other. It's quite widespread when it comes to Antarctica. So we're going to have an interesting talk here. Keep in mind, we really appreciate you guys coming on and being part of this. I see Paul Hassett is in here. Hello, sir. I see Roger Heller as well. And everybody else that comes in. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions or points or things you want to say, please do. And we will pay attention and chat the best we can, of course. And also keep in mind, if you want to be on this show, man, just hit those links down below to me, my Fanspeak, or my Twitter, and I will set it up and get you on, man. Eric says, where is Antarctica, Chester? I know about Antarctica. Yes, well, uh, are we making, did I misspell something? No, I didn't misspell
Uh,
something. No, I didn't. But secret government bases, aliens, and stargates. Yes, dude, there's a lot to talk about with Antarctica. But of course, also one of the things that helps us out is hitting that share button and letting your friends and family and extended community know what's going on so they can come over here and join us and get involved in this conversation. Whew.
oh, you did misspell it, by the way. You're missing a C.
Oh, did I?
Yep.
Goodness gracious.
English teacher, everybody.
Clap. It'll be one of those rare times.
Yeah,
I think one of the first thing is for the conspiracy, just as a warm up for this conversation, is Antarctica real?
Well, that's a whole nother wrinkle on it, dude. And I fixed it. It's fixed. God, man. But too quick.
But
just doing it too quick, not paying attention. Stupid typewriter, man. Nevertheless, I do it all the time. Only reason I know. I see. Yeah. But no, there is a lot of things. But so let's come over here and say hello first and give some people more time in here. We're already up to 12. Awesome. And let me say hi and hello to my panel here. Of course, we are joined by the Dalai Lama. Hello, sir.
Hello. I'm glad to talk about a frozen, desolate wasteland that might potentially have the key to humanity's salvation.
Oh, wow.
We're
That's a
talking
very
about
interesting statement. Oh. Say that again, Thunder.
I said we're talking about Ohio because where I live, I live in Ohio, and where I live in Ohio, we got slammed with snow last night.
Oh,
And-
sweet.
Yeah, it wasn't fun at all.
And he's saying it's hard to hear me. Well, let me make sure I'm turned up properly. And I got the mic in my mouth. That should be a little bit better. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Denelli. You're not usually here on the TFT, so we're happy to have you here. And of course, we also have Thundera with us, the legendary lightning bearer and holder of oily things.
You and these oily things. Speaking of oily things, there's supposedly quite a bit of oil in Antarctica.
Yeah.
One of the
Coal as
reasons
well.
one of the things we're going to be talking about later, especially me, is the treaty, the Antarctic Treaty, to preserve Antarctica for science and things of this nature, so no one could actually build, civilizations there or whatever, cities there, colonies, whatever you want to call it. But one of the reasons that exists is because they know there's oil there. But we'll get into that. We'll get there.
We will.
We'll get there.
And actually, what I'll do here is I will go and give an introduction to the show and cover, just the general outline of things that possibly will be talked about, and allowing that for all to be happening as it is. So let me jump over here real quick, and I'm going to share this with everybody, and I'll come over here and share it with the panel, of course. Just this is just a general outline, guys. Let me see here. That's not the one. Is this the one? Maybe it is. It's weird. They've changed it from what it used to be. There we go. All right. Anyway, now what you see sitting in front of you, of course, is a pyramid-like structure. Now, keep in mind that depending on where you are in Antarctica, the ice is anywhere up to 3 miles high, supposedly. That's impressive unto itself. And of course, every year we know that Antarctica is gaining ice. Don't listen to that stupid nonsense. Antarctica is getting bigger and bigger, and the ocean
Mhm.
levels are actually low. So don't listen to the idiots that get up and talk about the ocean levels are going up and we're all going to be flooded. They're out of their mind. Um, all right. But anyway, there are several of these kind of structures. Now, I have to say this offhand, though, just from the beginning. I remember a few years ago, there were a lot of photographs that came out of Antarctica showing a lot of rock ruins, a lot of ruined stuff, some pretty interesting carvings, and lots of stuff like that. They're very, very peculiar looking things. I can't find them anymore because I went to go collect them to show them
Uh-oh.
here, and they're gone. And I remember there were a whole bunch of people had gone down and had taken their photos of these very interesting ruins and stuff. Because we'll get into that. But I couldn't find them. Just keep in mind that there are pictures that are no longer accessible. At least I couldn't find them. Another thing, of course, we have is a lot of cave openings going straight into the ground, and this is a big one, right? This is huge. And this is rock here. This isn't ice, and this is going in. Who knows how deep that is? And there's many of them, right?
Yep.
Another little point here to give you, of course, is the size of it. And this is a nice little map here. It shows an overlay of America on top of Antarctica, so we can see this is a pretty big place, right? It's a.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's huge.
America is not really big when compared to say Africa, but we know how big America is, and it takes you 4 or 5 days to go from one coast to the other. So that gives you a good idea. Here's a look at it from underneath the ice, and we can see that it's basically one island with a peninsula. For a long time, we thought it was actually a split to that middle point, but we know it isn't now. And this map has some interesting stuff on there. It's got a lot of nice little detailed points from historical things. And then, of course,
Hmm.
we get into a couple of these here. We got this map here, and we have this one as well. These are ancient maps that talk about Antarctica. How odd, right? And then, of course,
Indeed.
Admiral Byrd. And he's a very interesting character when it comes to Antarctica. So I just wanted to kind of put that little thing together to give a general outline of things we could be talking about, and there's more. But I thought that would be a nice little introduction to it. Of course, on this show, we do a lot of where we just go and we kind of type in things, and which is something we don't normally do. But we're going to be doing that today, of course. So let me get rid of this and bring this over. All right, now I'm ready and I'm set up. So,
Oh.
who wants to talk about what first?
Um. Well, it's actually interesting that you're on Mr. Bird here, um, because one of the things, like I was talking about, one of the things that he said when he was there is he saw entire ridge lines full of like coal.
Hmm.
He believed that there was gems there, actual, gemstones, oil, all that good stuff. The stuff that makes people really rich in the
Hmm.
world. Um, and he believed it was, massive in scope how much was there. You can even find there's an interview, one of the last interviews he ever gave, right
Hmm.
before he passed, unfortunately. He talks about going down there and what he saw.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube. I know I've watched it before. And yeah, he says he could see just mountainsides of coal. You could just see it
Yep.
on the side of the mountain like it was just sitting there waiting for somebody to come pick it up. Um, and it's very interesting that we have, which is the thing I wanted to talk about mainly, was the Antarctic Treaty. We have an Antarctic Treaty that is signed by, I believe it's 53 countries now. Yes, 53 parties, it says. I'm assuming that's countries. Uh, Basically, it sets aside Antarctica as a scientific preserve,
Hmm.
establishes freedom of scientific investigation, and bans all military activity on the continent.
Hmm.
The treaty was the first arms control agreement established. Man, that's hard to say. During the Cold War. So pretty much one of the first things that all the major players in the world have agreed on is to leave Antarctica alone, which is very, very peculiar
It
because
is
they don't
peculiar.
usually agree on much. Like, especially not when it comes to a massive continent of land full of resources that no one's trying to exploit.
Hmm.
That is strange. That's very strange,
Well,
especially with some of the stuff he was saying in that interview.
yeah, then that interview was very interesting because he talked about some very interesting aspects of things he saw, and it brings up a lot of conversations on that are adjacent to it. I just do want to mention here that Paul Hassett says. Doesn't Google search on Firefox kind of defeat the purpose? Lol. Yeah, yeah, I get you. And honestly, if I did like with the Onion or one of those other search engines that isn't controlled by Google, maybe I would have been able to find them again. But I didn't do that. But nevertheless, another important thing is when we look at a lot of the Russian voyages to Antarctica, before
Hmm.
before the very modern time. But the Russians had a big interest in Antarctica, and they sent a lot of expeditions down there. And of course, they have their own maps and they have their own comments. And one of the things that the Russians talked about was, oh yeah, there's a lot of ice and it's pretty cold, but there are also several areas down there, large, huge areas that are thermally active, and they actually are
Hmm.
kind of like a paradisical jungle type of situation. And this is what the
Yep.
Russians reported in the 19th century. And it's like people just threw away these information. You're really giving us some heavy feedback, Thunder.
Oh, I am. Hang on.
Yeah. But so this is another interesting aspect when it comes to voyages and firsthand accounts. So were the Russians just lying to themselves? Why would they do that? And there's a ton of information. It's just nobody talks about it, right? And that's kind of the interesting thing. It's about the controlling of information, right? And what is talked about is what is not. And you talk about Google. Google is notorious for this. Matter of fact, I saw someone earlier mention the Mandela effect, and of course, we'll do a show on that eventually because it's so fascinating. But I think a lot of the Mandela effect is simply Google just controlling the narrative. I think really it's what it comes down to. And so, there is information that can be found, but if you don't know how to find it or you never heard about it to even look for it, then what are you going to know? Right. And I think what's going on now, especially with Google and, whatever their purpose is or whatever connections they might have to some governments, I think it's not about the current generation, like my generation or stuff. I think it's about future generations, is what they're looking at, kind of playing the long game and when it comes down to that stuff. But what do you think, Denali? We're kind of starting off here with actual expeditions and exploration of Antarctica with, of course, Admiral Byrd and the Russians, and there's others as well that also would bring into the Germans, the Nazi Germans and their expeditions to Antarctica, and they actually built some bases down there as well. What do you think about the any of these things?
Well, I mean, kind of just briefly overview of what you discussed about was that there has been report about a lot of natural resources
Yeah.
available underneath the ice, and even the land is viable. After a time for mass crop and development if it was needed be. And it's kind of interesting, like you got to mention that all these countries agreed to not exploit what's going on with that continent, because you see them fighting over the lands and territories for oil and stuff, and they have a basically this continent sized land that they're not even touching. So it's
Hmm.
kind of weird that they're not doing that.
It is, and
So
it's particularly weird because when we look at this, when this happened in 1961, and we look
mhm,
at who was the real boss of the world then, as it is now, America
mhm.
was absolutely in 1961. America was in charge, right? And we know the Cold War was going on, but we also know now that basically our government was lying to us all that time because they knew right well the Soviets had no way of dealing with us at all. at all. And then after the
Yeah,
course the fall
right.
of the wall, we all, the rest of us knew it. So the American government, pushed the Cold War because we want to have an enemy. It helps to be make the country productive and have something to focus on. But they knew there was no threat at all. The interesting thing is they volunteered this property, which they could have simply taken, right? I mean, quite easily, right? And of course, then
Mhm.
this brings in another conversation of the whole alien aspect of Antarctica, which a lot of people like to add stuff to, because there are a group of people who believe that the aliens that have been with us forever, they base themselves there. And there's a lot of YouTube shows about that. It's fascinating stuff. I don't know if I believe any of it, but
I
it's
mean,
interesting.
the other, yeah, the other ones is that Atlanta or ancient civilization, from just touching back from the previous conspiracy theories,
Hmm.
that was the country that everybody was talking about, Atlantis or whatever super ancient um, civilization was stationed there.
Well,
Whether it included, the aliens that you are mentioning about or something else, that's a lot of stories about Antarctica.
no, that brings us to, back to these maps, right? And I just brought up
Hmm.
two, guys. There's more than this. Matter of fact, there are some stone spheres that have been found all over the world. There's a bunch of them, and they all have a perfect layout of the world we see today. They're a little thicker, but then again, it looks like it's at a time where the waters were a little higher than they are now. But there are many ancient, truly ancient references to Antarctica, and many of them, this one right here, as you see, is a very ancient map, but it also is talking about Antarctica as being ice covered. So these people obviously had gone down there and seen it long before then. Supposedly, the West had discovered it. But then, of course, the Perry Reese one is very interesting because it shows a lot of life and things going on in it. Now, when you come back and reference and try to figure out what's going on with these maps, well, they tell you if you read Perry Reese, he's a famous general, by the way, Muslim general, Islamic general, and he says very clearly that he got these maps from more ancient maps. So this is a recreation from things he had seen on more ancient maps. So there was a time when in map making where they had an understanding of Antarctica, and there were people living there were things living there was civilization there in human memory. Now, if you listen to the mainstream science, they say, "Oh no, it's been covered by ice like that for billions of years." Some of them, literally, some of them think it's been that long. But obviously, it's not true. We have human interaction with Antarctica and um, in an ice-free way, or at least somewhat of an ice-free way. And we need to talk about that. But they don't like talking about stuff that makes them uncomfortable, I guess.
Not at all. Um, no, I mean, they always are revising, like the Vikings. They had to revise it like I don't know how many times. Oh, they came North America and this time, and then we find out no, they came much earlier, and then they find out even more evidence that they came even earlier than they estimated. So, we cannot always put full trust. What these experts say, because history tends to prove them wrong about their estimations about things.
Oh yeah, absolutely, in many many ways. Now here's a very interesting thing. Now, this is becoming less theory and more science as time goes by, which is kind of interesting. But this 12,000 year ago disaster, which science now
Hmm.
is academic and agrees upon that did happen, it was basically the Earth moved through this absolutely super dense field of space rocks, asteroids, meteor, and stuff like that. And when they just came raining down on the Earth and causing all kind of destruction, and there's a pretty solid theory about the glacier sitting on top of America, being similar size to Antarctica, and getting cracked because there was a big ocean sitting in there and it fell down, et cetera, et cetera. But this is generally this has become academic now. But one of the additional things that had been theorized from several reasons, and is starting to become actual science now, interestingly, is the fact that during that event, the planet was hit so hard that the equator actually shifted. Now, I'm not talking about a magnetic shift. I mean, to be fair, we're going through a magnetic shift now. And when we get, who knows, I don't know how long it'll be, another 20, 30, 50, 80 years,
Mhm.
our north and south will switch. But that isn't a magnetic thing. I'm talking about an actual polar shift, right? And you look at this map right here. And what this is showing you is what the old equator was. It's very different, whether the planet is literally on a different axis than it was before. And if you look at that axis, and you look at where Antarctica would be, well, a big, huge chunk of that would be sitting up kind of where South America is. So it would actually not have been frozen at all. And that's probably why humans had an interaction with it, because it's quite obvious that before that disaster, there was either a global civilization or more likely a super civilization which had colonies all over the place. And that's where we get these maps and understanding from. Now, you can go a lot deeper than that if you'd like. But I like this theory of the equatorial change, actually. I think it makes a lot of sense. The shift. Because if we look at these important sites around the Earth and we look at them on an older equator, they make a lot more sense than they do now. Anyway, I thought it was interesting.
Well, there's always like pyramids all over the world that it's tied to the stars, and
Yeah, sure.
they're
Well,
precise,
they are
and it's
precise, and that
weird.
old equatorial line lines up with just tons of pyramids and Easter Island and all kind of stuff. It lines up perfectly. It makes good sense, actually. I do
Mhm.
see here that Eric says Antarctica is full of ice holes. Yes, it is. I showed one earlier, big, huge ones. And of course, another geological aspect about Antarctica is there are mountain ranges way under the ice. I mean, whole mountains. There's also rivers that move underneath the ice, actual rivers. You talk about it's supposed to be so cold that everything is frozen, but yet we have multiple rivers that are and lakes that are huge that are flowing underneath Antarctica right now. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure with that continent. Now, did I lose Thundero? Because he's being real quiet.
He's probably fighting with his mic again.
Maybe. Mm,
Um, but yeah, no. I mean, that topic keeps coming up. That disaster of 12,000
it does.
BCs, and it kind of would line up because there's a lot of stories, um, ancient stories, either from the Bible or um, from ancient Sumerian or stories that have a lot of commonality between them, a lot of same thematic themes throughout them, which is kind of surprising if there wasn't any connection to them, especially in that time.
Yeah. No.
Well,
So,
can you guys
go
hear me
ahead.
now?
Yeah, we can
Yep.
hear you now, dude.
Okay. Is there any feedback? Does it sound better?
That sounds wonderful, actually.
Good. Fantastic. Yes, there is a lot of very interesting stuff underneath Antarctica.
Mm.
There's even, like you were talking about ruins, I was looking it up. There's even satellite images of what appears to be city landscapes in Antarctica that I found. Let me see if I can find the tab again here. Where'd it go?
Now, Eric Boyd is saying he meant it as a joke, but actually, the information I just gave you about the mountain ranges and rivers and lakes and stuff like that, that is not conspiracy theory. That's just mainstream science. So, you know,
There you go, Chester. I put. You probably actually looked at this article because I saw you had some of the pictures from it. But I put the article that I'm looking at that has a picture, a satellite image of what appears to be a city layout, um, an ancient ruins of a city layout on Antarctica from satellite bird's eye view.
Okay.
I put it in the Facebook chat thing. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there's different theories about what the Earth looked like way back in the day. Obviously, there's Pangea is the more prevalent one, where they think that the Earth was all one big landmass at one point with water around it.
Hmm.
Um, and Antarctica broke off from that, obviously. So it's very possible if the idea that there was people of some description that came before humans takes more as that gains more steam, or at least our history goes back farther than we realize, gains more steam. It's very possible there were people living on what became Antarctica. Whoever knows how long ago that was, and that we could find the ruins if we went down, if we were allowed to go down there and actually look. But that's what I was actually bringing up with the treaty is it's really hard to get there and do any kind of actual exploration
Hmm.
because the treaty prevents it. You have to jump through a lot of hoops unless you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. So,
Well, I do know somebody, actually.
oh,
I can make a comment on that. And it is interesting how we're approaching the conversation of Antarctica because it goes way deeper than what we're touching on right now. But
Hmm.
actually, I had a friend of mine who just recently passed away. Actually, it's just kind of an odd thing. I'm not particularly old, but all of my childhood friends, all of them are dead. I'm the last surviving member of a group of like a core group of like 7 people, right?
geez.
Yeah, and my extended group friend, a lot of them have passed away too. But it's just I'm not going to get into that conversation, but mm, that kind of sucks. But this
It does
guy,
suck.
it does suck. This guy, this friend of mine who passed away, he was a military contractor, and he would build bases and things like that. And he was down in Antarctica for quite a long time. I'm years, right? And they were building a lot of stuff down there, right? And he couldn't tell me what they built or stuff because NDAs and stuff like that. But it's just military
Right.
based stuff, right? It's not anything mysterious. But what he did say was the fact that even he could only go a certain distance. Beyond a certain point, deep, on onto the actual continent of Antarctica, they are not allowed at all. And there was a few times when he was in a plane that he could see over, and he actually saw he saw a bit of ice, but beyond that, he saw a lot of rocky terrain in the
Hmm.
distance. It wasn't all ice like they show you on Google's map at all, he said. But so there's a little bit of first eye confirmation as far as the Antarctica doesn't look like Google Map shows you, right?
Which is exactly what Robert Byrd said. It is icy, but it's also it's a landmass. Like you can see mountains, you can see land, you can see what looks like tundra and stuff like that. He said that repeatedly in different interviews. And like he would even say
Damn it.
you could see coal jumping out of the thing. You could see all sorts of stuff just sitting there, just looking right at you. That if you had a crew, you could just go mine it real easy. Um, so it's interesting that he confirmed that there's definitely more to Antarctica than what they want to tell us about. Because most people think of Antarctica, they think of that picture you just scrolled by with the cruise ships, and it's just all white. It's a big white,
Yes,
icy
it's not.
hellhole, basically.
It's
But
not.
it's not. It's a continent. It's just a
Yeah.
frozen one. It's just a very
Um,
cold one.
Now, and then that brings up interesting conversations as well, which could sad to hear that, Jesse. Yeah, it is sad, dude. But hey, you know what? Like I said before, drugs are for kids. When you become an adult, grow the hell up. That's what it comes down
Yep.
to. But here's this brings us into a whole nother aspect of Antarctica, since we're talking about maps and what it really looks like and stuff like that. Because we know just a few years ago under Obama, we had Kelly, we had the Pope, we had Putin, we had a whole bunch of world leaders were traveling down to Antarctica for what? Why was
Nobody
that?
knows.
Right? And no, and we don't see many
Nobody.
people talking about that, but that did happen. Keep that in mind. That did actually happen
I'm going
officially.
with aliens. I'm going with aliens. I think they had to meet the aliens down there. Maybe the aliens they were talking to are from a really cold climate. They can't tolerate warmer climates like most of our planet is that we live on anyway. So maybe that's where they had to meet them, was down there in the cold.
I'm going to throw something that you may or may not like out with that
Oh,
comment. I don't know that we've actually ever had aliens from another planet visit here. Maybe we might have. But
This
no, but
guy.
I think most of what we're seeing and talking about is something that's been here forever, maybe even before us.
Mhm.
I don't think it's alien. I think it's terrestrial.
Oh, it's lizard people. We got David Icke in here.
I didn't say anything about no damn lizard people. But seriously, because when
It could very well be, but it's pretty strange that they would choose to all go down to Antarctica, where we're told there's nothing there. Right? It's just an empty wasteland of ice, and some rocks and penguins.
well,
Other than that, there's nothing really there.
let me explain why I say that and why it's connected to Antarctica, though, and then
Go
tell
ahead.
me what you think. All right. Um, when we look at like we've mentioned here, and we'll keep mentioning here that all the stories we have today, and I think for we Westerners, the Greek ones are the most well known. Um, uh, we see these stories are repeated nearly verbatim across the whole planet, right? And of course, the Bible stories are those same stories. They just have a different representations than say God. But when we look at today, and we look at heaven, right, or the concept of heaven, it is an extra dimensional place, right? But if we go back in time, what we find just back in Roman era, right?
Hmm.
Heaven isn't extra dimensional. No one talking about extra dimensional stuff. What they're talking about, heaven, is just the old word for space, right?
Yep.
But then, okay, and then you go back to say with into Mesopotamia or Egypt, right? Babylonia, and of course you have Zachariah Sitchin, a very famous translator and writer and speculator about those ancient stories. And I think one of the things that he talked about what then I think maybe he made a bit of a mistake on, because if you read the older stuff, it's a little bit of a contradiction of what he said. He kept pushing about Nibiru, right, and this
Hmm.
12th planet, right. But we do know that Nibiru was often referring to Mars, right. We know this because Mars is the planet of crossing because it crosses across Jupiter, right. And But if we go back even deeper and we talk about where these people came from, that ended up messing with the DNA of things, the essence of things, and creating this slave race, which is us. The older stories don't say anything about them coming from another planet or space. It just said from another place. And many
Hmm.
times in some of the, especially African stories, it talks about them coming from the south. And I think when Sitchin was trying to translate the word Abzu, he translated it as meaning South Africa, and he might well be right. It's not like it's just some idiot's opinion on it. Zachary Sitchin was an extremely well studied scholar. But
Hmm.
I feel that actually the Abzu is talking about Antarctica, and I'm not going to get into it here why, because that would take forever. But there's a certain group of us that are in the anthropological world that we feel that the ancient references to the Abzu are talking about Antarctica, not South Africa. And if that is the case, and then these other people, these Anunnaki, for to use the Sumerian word, um, they came from the Abzu, and the Abzu would be
Hmm.
Antarctica. That was a very
Interesting.
long-winded
It,
thing, but hopefully you got my
it's
point.
interesting that you say that because when you think, let's think about it for a second. Where would be one of the most logical places for them to have some sort of port into the other continents, right? Like
Hmm.
say they're in Antarctica. Well, South Africa would be one of the best places. It's right, pretty centrally located, and it's right, not too far. Right, you can get there pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it would make sense. So maybe that could explain the if it was mistranslated or whatever you want to call it, that could explain why. Maybe it means both. In fact, it could even mean both. Maybe they didn't put a distinction in their language or whatever between a colony and a mainland, so they considered it part of their territory. Um, it's very possible. Very possible indeed. There is a lot of evidence. We've talked about this before. A lot of evidence that an intelligence, a being, whatever you want to call it, made humanity what it is today from another creature. There's a lot of evidence, even in genetics, of
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Not
absolutely.
just in the stories and things of this nature, but there's a lot of evidence, and it would make sense if, let's say, they had a massive empire somewhere, right? Or maybe it was the whole world, but they had a central place where they were from or whatever. If it was Antarctica, like let's say that it is, it would make sense that if the elite of this world, the leaders of the world, found out about it, they would want no one to go near it. There's a lot of
Yeah,
reasons they wouldn't want anybody to
sure.
go near that,
Uh,
but yeah.
And I did a search, which of course gave me nothing. But the reason why there's a group of anthropologists who believe that and disagree with Sitchin is because the Egyptian translation, the Egyptian version of the story, because remember, they're all the same. You go to India, it's the same damn story, right?
Hmm.
Their version of the story, they talk about the gods' homeland, where they came from. All right. They talk about it being an island south of the great continent, and of course, Africa being the great continent.
Right.
The Egyptian version is very precise that it is a southern island. The Sumerian
Hmm.
versions or Mesopotamian versions are less precise, and this is really where I think confusion comes into play because one of the one of the
There you go.
ancient
There's a map,
yeah, I see that.
Egyptian map of
Yeah.
Antarctica.
That's not an Egyptian one though. That's mislabeled.
I know.
Um, I know this map. But anyway, one of the misconceptions is a lot of people today we see this humanizing of the gods. When you think of the Greek gods, you think of Zeus and Mercury and Apollo and Athena, etc. But actually, when you go deeper in time, the gods are the planets. They referred to them as the planets. So the Sumerians making their gods in connection with the planets makes perfect sense because that's what ancient man did. And I think
Hmm.
this is the mistake that Mr. Sitchin had made. Not to disrespect him, I think he was a great researcher, and I've enjoyed his books, of course. But he wasn't perfect. He made a few mistakes here and there.
Well, yeah, he's human.
Yeah.
We do that. Um, there is also another interesting theory talking about, you're talking about the ones who came before, whatever you want to call them.
Hmm.
Uh, there's also another interesting theory. Obviously, the greatest one, this besides the Holy Grail itself, it's the second Holy Grail, and that would be Atlantis. If somebody could find Atlantis, actually find it, and prove this is Atlantis, would be massive for archaeologically and just historically. There's also the theory that Antarctica is actually Atlantis, and that the catastrophe that it was swallowed into the sea was actually it being swallowed by ice, and that's why it's frozen that way. Um, which could even kind of go with what you're saying, because there's also people who believe that Atlantis was the home of the advanced people, extremely advanced people, which is what part of the story, but that they could have been some of the people talked about as the ancient ones who were more advanced and things in these stories, because they were, according to the account, quite advanced technologically beyond anything anyone else
Yeah.
had. So there is people who've floated that out there. I don't know much about that particular theory. I just noticed it when I was doing a little research, and it would make sense if for it that could be a way that the story was told, that it went into the sea. Well, technically, it does go into the sea because it gets covered by ice. It
Yeah.
vanishes underwater, just a solid form of water instead of the liquid.
Sure. And of course we were kind of dancing around the whole idea of Atlantis, and of course it always comes back to that, doesn't it? And you, of
Hmm.
course, you have a lot of scholars these days that argue that Atlantis never existed. There was no Atlantis, and of course there are so many ideas. It's somewhere. It's in South America. It's in Africa. It's here. It's there. There's lots of things, and the thing is, I believe if you, I don't believe actually, I know from all of the different stories I've read and studied from around the world, there were multiple Atlantis like things, actually.
Hmm.
There are many cities and cultures lost to that disaster. And I think a lot of the things we're getting in the confusion of stuff beyond Plato. Is that actually? I think there was a worldwide culture before the disaster. Like I said, we don't have any clue. Was it literally global like we are today, or was it simply a superculture that had colonies all over the place? But either one of those
Right.
is true, though. See,
Yeah.
and so Atlantis isn't necessarily a place. I think it is a culture. And
Right,
that
it could very well just be a people. That could be in their name. They could have been the Atlanteans, and they called themselves Atlantis as a people. That was, maybe that's how that's how it was translated into
maybe.
Greek. It became Atlantis. That's what they meant. There's a lot of different ways you can look at it. I think you're probably right. It was most likely, um, if anything, it was from those people and their culture, and that's what it was called. It was spread out all over the place, and maybe I'm right. Maybe they didn't distinguish between their mainland and colonies. They considered it all the same territory. Um, it's very possible.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind is, of course, one of the things that comes back when talking about Atlantis is when Plato explained it. And now that we know, we have an actual firm date for when the disaster
Hmm.
happened. An actual academic date. It perfectly lines up with his, by the way. And trust me,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people in the anthropological and archaeological world that hate that. They hate that. That's a fact, right? But so that is interesting. But you have to keep in mind they're talking about beyond the gates of Hercules, right? But
Hmm.
the problem is there's three places that are called that. Of course,
Yes.
We have Gibraltar. We also have up in between Ireland and Scotland. There's also another Gates of Hercules, right?
Hmm.
And then, of course, another Gates of Hercules, which you very rarely hear anybody mention, but has been called this for a very long time, is the Great Horn of Africa. I mean, not the Horn of Africa, the Cape of Africa, down in the south,
Right.
and that is called the Gates of Hercules as well, right?
Well, you could
So,
also with the understanding of the world at the time, especially when the Atlantean story is supposedly beyond the gates of Hercules. Okay, well that's everywhere else besides the Mediterranean if you go with Gibraltar. So
mhm,
literally that could be just about anywhere. I mean, they wouldn't unless they knew more about the oceanic layout than we understand. They probably wouldn't have really knew that this was separate, that any of the oceans they see, like, because obviously they knew the Indian Ocean was there and they knew the Atlantic Ocean was there from trade within the Mediterranean, but they wouldn't have known necessarily that the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean are different. They wouldn't have known that unless they knew for a fact that there was land masses in between, which there's obviously debate on whether or not they knew that.
yeah.
But even if they did, they might still not have a full picture of what the world looks like and still think it's all one ocean and this is just another piece of that same ocean.
True, that's true. And let's be clear. Anybody who wants to sit up and say that man has not been running around this planet in boats for tens of thousands of years is absolutely full of it. We
Yep.
know without question that humans have been moving around this planet. We know there's a direct genetic connections between the South Americans and Asians and Africans as well. And I'm not
Hmm.
talking about any kind of Bering Street ice bridge. We're talking about a completely different line of people, right?
Yep.
We also have the situation where it's down in New Zealand and Australia and other places like that. When the Maori got to New Zealand, there were already people there. There were two
Yep.
types of white people already living there, and they're still there, by the way. And you can
Yeah.
they've actually been doing some interesting genetic testing recently, tracking where these people came from. But they came there long before the Maori got there. They were there for, they say, thousands of years.
Hmm.
So we
Yeah.
already know people were moving around. So it's kind of nonsense. I do see a couple of interesting things here. Eric Boyd says, could it be that Antarctica has loads of precious metals? Coals was mentioned, but I'm curious if gold is up in there, up in them there hills.
Them
Maybe,
there.
possibly,
I
right?
think I'd have to watch it again, but I think he did mention you could see. I think he mentions coal specifically. I know that. I
He
remember that.
did. He
But
did.
I had for some reason I remember he mentioned more than just coal. He mentioned. I swear he said something about gemstones or something like that. I'd have to watch it again.
I think he said
But yeah, he did
precious
mention
stones or something like that.
precious stones. Yep.
But
Yep. So
yeah,
almost definitely. I mean, there's no
yeah,
reason that gold shouldn't be there. Like,
yeah.
why
I
wouldn't
mean,
it be?
that's a whole nother theory line we could go down. Absolutely. Paul says
Yeah.
the builders, the Nephilim, the sons of God, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, of course. Roger Heller, where does it say that we can find another and see no man? Yeah, That was a horrible movie. Eric W. says the continent of Atlantis was an island which lay before the Great Flood in an area we now call the Atlantic Ocean, possibly.
Hmm.
But do understand that the Atlantic Ocean is named after Atlanta, not Atlantis. Paul
Yep.
Hassett, if you look real close, you can see a figure frozen in ice with what looks like an American flag motif. Oh, there you go. The Tales from Beyond the Gate. Yeah, there you go. Zach Hawkins said, I really enjoy these subjects, and I'm glad I find more folks in the comic side of YT into it as well. George says something. Chester, what was named first, the Atlantic or as in ocean, or Atlantis as in people and place? Mm, I mm,
It's
mm,
hard to know.
I don't think I could answer that, George. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if
But
anybody knows the answer to that, to be honest.
yeah, but I'm sure someone does. It's just not a piece of information that I have in my head at this moment. But I've had this image up here for a while, and I finally get to actually asking the question I wanted to do. Does that look like a pyramid to you?
Hmm. Sure does.
Do I still have
There's even
Denali
one
here?
from the.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Yeah, he's just
Wait,
muted.
Yeah, it
is it?
is.
It looks like a
I
pyramid.
mean, it's either Mother Nature sculpted it very nicely to get those points as
How?
a mountain ridge.
That was nice of her.
Exactly.
That's a nice
Yeah,
picture.
exactly. It's a very nice picture. Sculpting it very fine, and those sharp edges. I
Four
haven't seen that.
sides and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And you look how beat up it
There's another
is.
picture of that from the top where
Yeah.
it's definitely a pyramid. There's
Oh
no
yeah,
way
I
that's
saw that.
natural.
I'll get over and I'll show that right now, actually. But it certainly looks like a pyramid. Here's one that's showing showing the top
Yeah,
view. Yeah,
that's 100% a pyramid. That's not a mountaintop. That's
yeah, it's
some
four-sided.
force carved that.
And
Yeah,
it even because we know that the pyramid, we call them four-sided, but actually they're eight-sided, right?
yeah.
People don't notice the little depressions that are in it so easily, but this even has it, and it looks beat up and stuff. But even if you look at the shadow, of course, we see the snow build up on this side of the shadow, but over here it's so smooth. But and it also kind of explains, time, history, but I don't know. It's this would be the strangest bit of nature creation I ever seen. And you know what it might
It's
come down to. When we go over to talk about a tangent. I'm going to go on one. When we go into the
uh
Ural Mountains, we find a lot of evidence from ancient culture. The interesting thing about the ancient culture we're looking at over there, it's not human. It's Neanderthal. And the
hmm
Neanderthals had culture. They carved rocks. They made shapes. They made monoliths. They did all kind of stuff. This idea that they were these stupid things just hiding in caves is not accurate at all, right?
No.
But what they did was, we can see very clearly, when you look at it with a scientific mind, following the scientific method, right? What they tended to do, which is different than what we humans do, is they would see something that looked like something, and then they would go and knock rock away from it to make it look more like that. That's what they
Hmm.
did. We don't do that as much. We humans will take and just create something raw, right?
Right.
That's just our way. We have that that imagination. But the Neanderthal, they did many, many times. They would see some rock or something that looked like something, and then they go bang on it until it looks more like it. And that's what this looks like to me. This kind of looks like something that had a kind of pyramid shape. Maybe it's something they had seen, right? And they went and worked on it because they thought it was holy or something like that. This feels very much like some of the other Neanderthal type stonework I've seen. This is an enormous job, but I don't know. I just can't see
Well, even
nature
to
making that.
no, nature definitely didn't make that. Well, even to today, we still do that if necessary if we're trying to memorialize something or whatever. Look at Mount Rushmore. We turned a mountain into those heads. Um, Whereas we could have just built that somewhere, but we didn't.
Yeah,
We did it into a mountain face, and it was just because
yeah,
artistic reasons and da da da.
yeah.
But maybe that's the same idea here. Maybe this particular mountain just had was in the right spot, had the right look, so they decided to pyramid it instead of just building a
Maybe.
pyramid there.
Yeah. And do keep in mind that pareidolia is a thing. It is real. It's not a joke. We do
Hmm.
have things, and we can look like, for instance, I think it's fallen now, but when I was younger, down in Tennessee, I believe, or Virginia, maybe, there's a place called the Old Man in the Mountain, right?
Hmm.
And if you sit at the right angle to this outcropping of stone, it looks like a man's face. Now, if you move around it to other positions, it's not a man's face at all. But if you were standing in the exact right position, it looked like a human face. And that, of course, is pareidolia. Our
Hmm.
brain trying to make an understanding of stuff, and this is what it comes from. It's very interesting little thing, and I've actually talked to one. I have a doctor's class today, actually, and I will be going to that after. And one of them is an oncologist, and I've actually had this conversation with him. Now, the way the human eye works is quite interesting. Your eye actually has two gigantic black spots in it on each eye. Now, you don't see black spots when you look around, you see complete field of vision. But what your brain is
Hmm.
doing is filling in the information that should be there, right? And then, of course, that comes to the understanding of how vision works. It isn't like a camera. Your eye doesn't take the visual information and put it into your head. No, it takes the data, and in your brain, there's a mechanism that creates what your brain thinks it could be. This is why what I see as green is not what you see as green. We just all agree it's green, right?
Right.
This is how the human eye works. This is how the human brain works. Matter of fact, there was a study done some years back where they tried to recreate what the world really looks like, and it basically looks like static with shape
Yeah.
in it, right? That's what the world really looks like. We just create this visualization. And that's kind of interesting why we create it to look the way it does, too. That's kind of another interesting, whole different conversation. But the point being that your eye can and your mind can create illusion for you. It's the deja vu,
Yes.
various things like that. So keep that in mind. But even with that in mind, this is a damn pyramid.
Yeah, yeah. It would have to be. It would be an impressive amount of matrixing for your brain to turn, especially that top-down image, into anything but a pyramid. That's a pyramid. That was
Hmm.
crafted in that manner, and not by nature. Um, and it's an interesting idea that our brains will do that because it'll even trick our conscious mind into seeing things that aren't there. And it's doing that because we like to understand what we're looking at. We don't want to be confused or even scared of what we're looking at. So it'll make things try and make sense to us,
Hmm. Yeah.
even if that's not at all what's happening in front of us.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing that the brain will do. And one of the other things you were saying, how we all just kind of agree on colors. Well, I don't because I'm colorblind,
Yeah.
but everybody else agrees on colors. And I've often asked people, maybe I see the world the way it really is. Maybe your guys' eyes are the ones that are tricking you, and
Hmm.
you would never know. There's no way to really
There's no
know
way to know.
because
Yeah.
there's no way to sense it.
And the freaky thing about it is, if you understand exactly how this works, what I see as a human, a normal person walking down the street, your perception could
Hmm.
be, some for me would look alien. I mean,
Right.
literally, that's how our brains work. But the thing is you're raised from it as a child, or even if you're not as a child, when you come into contact and learn language, we are taught this is that. So we all have an agreement, even though our brain actually isn't agreeing. It's a very fascinating conversation, but
It
uh,
is.
it is. But I do see a few comments over here, so let me catch them up. Could be the angle of the picture, but it doesn't look like a pyramid. It looks like a pyramid to me, but that's okay. We don't have to agree. Now he says he sees the top-down version of it, and okay, it's a pyramid. Yeah, there you go. Wait, so nature wind can't create a four-sided pyramid, but random mutation over billions of years can create DNA? Ah,
Oh,
nice one, Paul.
we'll get
Um,
there.
we'll have to do a show, but that's a very technical show to do the DNA one.
Yes.
I'm certainly willing to tackle it, but that will certainly that's a very technical show. We'll have to do make sure we have our research done
And
to
it's
to
also
even
a very
approach it.
touchy subject because, unfortunately, people, well, not unfortunately, I guess that'd be the wrong way to put it, but people do tie their emotions deeply into their beliefs. And
They do.
some things that we've discovered scientifically kind of destroy a lot of people's beliefs.
They do.
So we have to be cautious with
We
that one.
do. And the thing about DNA, what are you doing? Stop it. Stop being stupid. Okay.
Boomer alert.
Yeah. But I don't need that language either. But here's the thing about DNA, to just sum that whole thing up. Like I said, we'll have to do that show because it's very interesting. But here's the thing to sum it up for you. Here's our DNA, right? These little fancy little strands of we've all studied in school. But the thing
Hmm.
is, for
Hmm.
DNA to be what it is, it's equivalent. I mean, we're talking about the smallest living thing, by the way, not a complex creature like, say, a human or an eagle or something like that. But it's basically equivalent to you taking a handful of sand, throwing it up in the air, and it randomly falling down in place, creating the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
That's awesome magic.
That's magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
But and this is the reason why I am a intelligent designer. I do not see, and here's the interesting thing: the smarter the scientists you find, the more they believe that,
Yeah.
because it just is impossible. It's impossible. Now,
Even
I
if
don't know.
they don't believe in a god, they just
Yeah.
believe something caused something, at least started it. Something lit the fuse that made it happen.
Hmm.
Domino affected it. But I can actually tie this right back into what we're talking about with
Yeah.
Antarctica and the pyramids. Like Chester was saying, there's a lot of evidence that our DNA was tampered with. It's almost irrefutable at this point.
Sure.
Somebody created our DNA the way it is. It's not natural. And most likely, if those people were living among us, which they probably were, they would need a place to do that. And we know that there was a cataclysmic event that changed the entire world about 12,000 years ago, roughly.
Yeah.
Most likely, Antarctica at one point was a place people could live. Life, it wasn't a
Mm.
frozen wasteland. Things could live there more than just the few animals that do. And that's probably very likely where they were. I would venture to guess that all this talk about this treaty and all this stuff, they say it's for science and this. Okay, Antarctica's huge. Why do they need that entire continent to do science on it when they don't have colonies that stretch across the whole continent? They have a few bases here or there on the continent. So why do they need this massive landmass? That is going to always breed people thinking, well, what are they hiding? They're hiding
Yeah.
something. Why would they need to control that entire huge continent? It's like the fifth biggest continent or fourth biggest continent to do science on, whatever that means. Just
Yeah.
vaguely call it science.
And they keep doing various things that make it look suspicious.
Hmm.
But you know, the thing that it is with the whole creation ideas and aliens and things like that. And the reason I mentioned the equatorial shift, and it's funny that you get certain scientists that will argue it because, on one hand, they 100% agree that the North Pole once sat over Montana. And that's why we had the great ice sheets that were spread across America, and it obviously would have been into the Pacific Ocean as well. They agree
Hmm.
with this. This is long time science. There's no argument whatsoever. Zero argument. So I'm saying, okay, well, how did the North Pole move from Montana to where it is now? And they're like, no
They
freaking
mumble.
comment, right? So
Right.
it's this is the thing with these guys. They omit information all the time, and they will tell
Yes.
you stuff that as if it is real. You go to look at all these documentaries. They're talking about, oh, this is this, da, 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 da. And of course it's not. It's all theory, all of it. But they
Hmm.
always present it as if it is the absolute gospel. And this is
Yeah.
something I hate about what scientists do. I hate they do that. And of course, you have a lot of these mouthpieces like Neil deGrasse Tyson and stuff like that. He's a mouthpiece. That's all he is, by the way. I understand he's never done
Correct.
anything of value ever. He's just a
Well,
public face.
it's a
No,
little harsh, but
no,
okay.
it's true though. It's 100% true. He's written a couple papers. He's kind of like Obama. They made Obama in charge of the Harvard Law Group or something like that when he was a student. He did nothing. He produced one little mediocre paper, and it's politic, dude. And
Hmm.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is absolute politic. I like him. I dig him. I think he's a cool, charismatic spaceman. That's what he is, right? But
Unfortunately, he's not an honest man, though. He has been caught plagiarizing repeatedly.
he has. That's another issue with him.
Yeah,
But I mean, it's you know,
it's sad.
it is sad. But the point being, I think that seeing as the equator was different, it was shifted from what it is today. It really explains a lot. Now that we've come to an understanding that yes, the great disaster did happen, we know there was a great flood, and if we can get science to come to the to acknowledge the equatorial shift, then everything starts falling together beautifully. Because now we get
Hmm.
an understanding of all these other places that are kind of in odd positions, but when you shift it to the where it is, everything is in a direct line. Everything was built on the equator quite precisely, actually. And
I
things start
wonder.
lining up, and of course Antarctica is then going to be out of the ice, well, a big chunk of it anyway.
I wonder if anybody's ever done it. I'm sure somebody has. That pyramid-looking thing that's in Antarctica. I wonder if anybody's ever done a star chart from it and see if it lines up with anything. Because a lot of the
Probably do.
pyramids do line up with things directly. Like even now, they still do. They're
Mhm.
especially the ones in Giza are incredibly accurate. So I wonder if anybody's ever. I'm sure somebody has. I didn't even think to look for that actually, just this moment. But it's just interesting, like you said, that 12,000 years ago something happened. Well, roughly 12,000 years ago, something happened to completely change basically the surface of the Earth. We don't know what it was specifically, but something definitely caused a cataclysmic event. And it's very well possible because we know for a fact that the Sahara didn't always used to be a desert. There was a time when it wasn't. So it's very well possible that Antarctica didn't used to be a frozen desert. It didn't used to be an Arctic wasteland. It probably had at least enough of a place where people could live. It's just interesting how little scientists are willing to just make that leap in a large motion to just say, okay, we think this happened, because it's not even that's necessarily that they're hiding something. It's more they're paid to be right. So if they're really wrong about something like that, it's gonna
My
affect
belly is
their
horrible.
pay. But it also, with the 12,000-year-old cataclysm, we talked about hidden history. It helps explain some of the megaliths and the huge things like the pyramids that exist all over the world that, as far as we know, would have been extraordinarily difficult for these people at the time to build.
Hmm.
So, or some of it even impossible to build. I mean, there's stones we found that are cut that are humongous. They're gigantic. There's no way these people did that and then moved it to where it is in the position that it's in. Um, so it's most likely, if it's anything, it was the people who maybe created us, in fact, um, that were before the cataclysm that did it. They had the technology or whatever to do it,
Hmm.
and they set that all up. And Antarctica could just be another one of their places. It could have been their homeland for all we know.
Possibly. Yeah, like I said, the Egyptians, that's what they thought. The gods came from there, right?
Yep.
It's an interesting conversation. And of course, I think, because we have been doing this an hour, so we need to shift a little bit to kind of cover the basis of Antarctica. And, one of the big, we've actually been talking about it, but one of the big things about Antarctica, of course, is the UFOs and aliens
Oh yeah.
type approach. And I think the conversation we've been having in those are connected, actually.
Hmm.
And of course, this brings us to Operation High Jump. Now, Admiral Byrd, other than his expeditions to Antarctica, he was a very famous fella because I think he's the first dude to fly a plane over the North Pole. And of course, he also had his stories about flying over the North Pole and seeing a civilization, meaning going into the Hollow Earth. Now, you would think some dude in modern time, if he came forward and he say, "I was flying a plane, I flew inside the Earth, and I met people and I talked with them, and et cetera, et cetera," he would be laughed out of any kind of position he had. But here's the thing: they promoted him several times.
Hmm.
So Admiral Byrd was extremely trusted, an extremely valuable man to America. And this is, of course, coming in before and even after World War II, where that's not a game, right? You're not playing around. You gotta have serious people involved. But yet the American government saw him as extremely valuable. Now that
Right.
that lays, precedence on even his Hollow Earth story, right? Maybe you don't know that he's also that guy. But of
Hmm.
course, Project High Jumped, he was sent by the American government with a full armada down to
Yep.
Antarctica to deal with the Nazis, right? Because they had a base down there. The American government sent him, put him in charge, right? And they came back with their tail between their legs because they got their butts kicked. And their accounts of what was going on were saucers that just were
Yeah.
tearing through the armada, which was badly damaged and somewhat destroyed. So this
Right.
story, in and of itself, has some extreme credence because of who it's coming from. Admiral Byrd, one of the most respected military people in American history, right? It's not just some
Hmm.
Yahoo on YouTube making a video called
Right.
TFT,
Some
right?
guy who claims to be a doctor, right? Just some. He was an actual real life
Dude,
explorer. He'd been literally all over the world. Um, it's interesting you bring up the Nazis because I was actually looking at this, and the reason that they claim today, anyway, that Hitler sent his expeditions to Antarctica was to find a replacement for margarine fat, in case because he thought he was going to get cut off from margarine for his people. That sounds like just nonsense to me. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that Hitler spent that many resources sending people to Antarctica to find fat. That's just sounds like nonsense to me.
it
Um,
is, especially when they build such a huge base. Now we know the
yeah.
base is real. It hasn't been disclosed, but there was a big, huge sub base there. Yeah.
Hmm. Yep. So the real question is what did the Nazis find in Antarctica that now we're trying to hide?
Yeah, because
They found something, obviously.
this is all obviously in connection to itself. Because
Yeah.
after that is when America really started banging on Antarctica, and then so of course, eventually when they shut up on it and they locked it down like crazy, because
Hmm.
it is locked down and you can't go there. So
Because we know for a fact that the Reich was obsessed, largely obsessed, well, not the whole thing, but a lot of them were obsessed with the occult, right? And finding all sorts of artifacts and things to try and better understand the world. So, what could they have found down there that would make them want to build a submarine base that, according to Operation High Jump, we had to send one of the most renowned admirals to ever exist down there to destroy it?
yeah,
Uh, that is very interesting. I mean, it could be anything. It could be a million different things,
yeah,
but it's very interesting that it was that much of a ordeal to try and get rid of whatever this base was and whatever this base was guarding.
yeah, and it's showing German bases here as far as where they were. And look how deep into the ice they went, right? Which
Yep.
in and of itself is a interesting conversation, right? But well, of course, we could continue on this subject. We could talk for hours and hours about all kind of interesting things, but we don't have that kind of time, and we're just kind of touching the surface of it, really. But
Mhm.
Admiral Byrd is a very interesting fellow. But
Yes.
I think, the last Antarctica, conspiracy theory things we need to touch is this. Of course,
Flat Earth.
well,
Dun dun dun.
we have to cover it because it is absolutely directly connected to Antarctica.
They
And
don't believe Antarctica exists. It's just a big sheet of ice.
Yes, a dome, because they believe we're in a dome. And we'll have to do a flat Earth episode too, because it is really fascinating. I don't agree with the flat earthers, but what they have found is some is mathematical error, and that in
Yes.
itself is interesting. And I want to know why. Why should there
They've
be
also
any
found
error?
strange coincidences,
They
like
have.
the UN map looking almost exactly like a old flat Earth map from way back in the day.
Yeah.
It has this image with what looks like a frozen ring around the outside of a flat plane.
Hmm.
Um, which is very interesting coincidence, and it makes people
It
go,
is.
hmm. And
Well,
then obviously you have the Antarctic Treaty, which is very rigorously enforced to a preposterous level for what should just be a big wasteland. So it makes people, like I said, go, what's
mm,
going on? Why is
yeah,
this such a big deal if somebody
yeah.
goes there?
Well, to be fair though, this is my now I've studied quite a bit of cartography in my life. It's actually kind of a little hobby of mine for quite a while. I actually love maps, but this is actually my favorite map. Now you take away that ice ring, but I'm just this the UN map, this overhead map. It is a wonderful map because it allows you to have a flat globe map that is proportionally accurate. If you look at all the
Right,
continents here, they're in actual proportion as they should be, right?
right.
So actually, I love this map, and it really gives you a much more interesting look at the world. It lets you see, what's going on here, right?
Hmm.
But that is not that as aside from the flat earthers. But of course, the flat earthers are all about Antarctica being nothing but a giant ice ring that goes around the planet. Um,
Hmm.
your static is coming back strong again, dude.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Denali, do you have any comments on that, sir?
Um, I mean, I'm just taking it in. Really, I don't really ascribe to the flat Earth theory either, because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of mathematical
Error.
um, errors to their
Yeah.
calculations, and unfortunately, nobody said you had to be a good math mathematician to present a theory.
Now look at this
Um,
one. I haven't seen this one yet. This is a new one.
Oh yeah, the
but
donut.
Yeah, I haven't seen that before. That's interesting, though. That
Yeah.
is an interesting way to think
Halo
about it.
ring,
Yeah,
yeah.
I like it.
So
Now I'm just going through using these things. What I'm actually looking for, I'm looking for something specific. Oh, we got to do that too one day. Well, I don't know if we could do a whole show on it, but we need to talk about the ancient giant tree thing because that is awesome.
Hmm.
Um,
It is awesome.
It is awesome. We'll have to do flat Earth as well. And I think with that, I'm definitely going to cover more. One of these guys, of course, will cover the modern fad that is flat Earth. But me, I'm going to talk more about the ancient description of things and more of the footstool of God type of approach to that because I think that's fascinating too. But what am I? I'm looking for a specific thing here, and I'm wondering if I have to do another search for it again.
Which
Uh,
one are you looking for?
I'm looking for the one that shows the flat Earth, but it shows more continents and more suns beyond it.
Oh,
Mm,
interesting.
let me just
But what you were
type that
talking about with the
in.
maps is what most people don't know this. The map that most people are familiar with is wrong. The proportions are all off. Things are in the wrong places. It's because the way the Earth looks is actually much more like the top-down one, like you were
Here we go.
saying. But in order to stretch it out onto a flat map, like we would read a book,
Hmm.
you have to kind of fiddle with stuff to
Yeah.
make it fit on the page right. So, like things like New York, um, and I think it's like Italy is actually more close in alignment with each other on a real map, whereas the map we're used to is it's kind of like you know juxtapositioned more. Um, so it's just interesting how much false knowledge we all just take as real. Just like even the world, the shape of our world, the continent size and everything.
Yeah. Now, if you look at this right here, this is an idea, insane as it might be, but it actually has some research behind it that is talking about we live in this inner ring and then the outer ring and then the last ring. And one of the concepts that's coming out of this, oddly enough, once again going back to Atlantis, is talking about that we are Atlantis. The three rings, the Earth itself is Atlantis, and the Great Flood was the drowning of Atlantis. I know that's weird, but if you look at it here,
Interesting.
there's three rings,
okay,
right?
so right, so
Yeah.
if we're Atlantis and the flooding the Earth, so how are we still here?
Well, we were
We got lucky.
reintroduced by the aliens. But it is fascinating little thing that, and this shows you how deep the human imagination can go. If you give it enough rope, it will hang itself.
So
But
where's the other
fascinating.
two rings then?
They're beyond our. We're not allowed to see them because we're
Yes, they're
just.
beyond Antarctica that we're not allowed to go to, Denali. They won't let us go there.
Yeah, yeah. We're not special,
Mm,
Denali. Um,
I see.
we're just
Only
beyond.
Obama gets to go there.
Yeah, but that is a separate
Well, Trump
conversation, of
now.
course. But it does touch up Antarctica because if you see on this map that I was just showing you, well, there are multiple Antarcticas, aren't there, in this theory?
Yeah,
Yeah. Can you zoom out?
very
I did. Yeah, I
strange.
did zoom out. It's a weird little concept, but it's fun. Actually, I think it's cool. And then some of the other interesting things I've seen as far as that goes is, of course, if you follow that idea where Antarctica is actually a ring of ice and it's a dome, well, then you get into the old stories that talk about the heavens are made of water, right? And
Hmm.
that we have been separated by a firmament, a dome, to give us oxygen from the waters above, the
Hmm.
waters of heaven. And that sounds odd. It sounds weird. But then again, in the for the ancient people, it was the most normal day-to-day thing, right?
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
if
for
you
them it
think of
wasn't anything special.
well, if you think about it, we are in a dome of oxygen.
Hmm.
If we get out beyond the atmosphere, we kind of suffocate and kind of explode because
Well, it's a globe.
there's no. Yeah, I mean, you know where I'm going at.
Hmm.
I'm just saying that once we pass the atmosphere, we can't breathe. We have to have specialized equipment. Unless we're being lied to, and then we're Superman,
Hmm.
and we're able to actually do it. But
Now, take a look at this map right here. Oh, come on now. Come on now. You loaded. What are you doing? Don't be like that. Be good. Be good. Here we go. We're going to do it again. Oh, you bastard. All right.
Zoom into it.
I will. I mean, I will. All right. Fine. Now, but here, take a look at this. Now, this is something that makes me chuckle, right? Because if we're gonna, I mean, we're having fun here. I mean, this is TFT, right?
Hmm.
But if we're gonna have a serious conversation about a literal, actual flooded continent, I mean, a literal sunken continent, we have to be a little bit realistic about it. We can't just be, full on scientific because, then you're not having a conversation. You're just dreaming and speculating, right? But here's the thing. Now here's the classic Mu, of course, and of course you have the Atlantis over here in the oceans. But the thing is, if we had flooding of such that would flood out these low-lying continents, then why is Australia, South America, North America, and Asia basically exactly the same?
Yeah,
We have
it's a
to be
little
more
off. It's a
logical,
little
guys.
off.
I mean, it's fanciful, it's fun. I'd probably write a story about it, because it'd be fun. But no, the idea of South America being Atlantis makes sense. The idea of places around Saudi Arabia, Africa, being Atlantis are certainly makes sense, and of course Antarctica being Atlantis also makes sense. Now, like I
Hmm.
said before, there are many Atlantices, but all across the world is full of stories of lost cities, and we know there are many of them under the water. We've discovered them, and there is.
Right.
It's unfortunately very difficult to do archaeology under the water, but they're working on it. They are. But they're all over the place. But Atlantis being this specific one because the other stories don't talk about lands of magic per se. They don't talk about technologies and stuff. They just lost
Hmm.
cities. That's it. But Atlantis, the interesting thing about the story that we haven't really talked about is the magic of Atlantis. The technology of Atlantis. It was a high end civilization that was
Hmm.
awed by the Greeks themselves. And of course, we know the Greeks were far more sophisticated than the Romans. Most people don't seem to understand that, but the Greeks were way, way beyond the Romans, right? And
Hmm.
really, anything that's come since. We have created electricity and computers. We're not sophisticated like those people were. We're not. We're actually
No.
very dumbed down and we're very uneducated comparatively.
Yeah, they had a very high standard of education
Yes, they did.
in the ancient Greek world.
as well as
Everybody
physicality and
was,
health as well.
yes, and it's interesting because they had their own little sections that focused more on individual aspects. So you had your Athenians, which were much more intellectual merchants, things of this nature, and then the Spartans were obviously much more physical. Now they was also focused on the mental aspect too. They weren't idiots,
Mhm.
but they definitely focused on the more martial aspect of humanity.
Don't forget the thespians.
The thespians, yes.
How can we not forget the thespians?
How could
Yes,
I ever forget the
must remember
thespians?
them. Understand that, yes, I know the word is used today to talk about the actors, but it actually were people in Greece. Haha, you learn
Nope.
something new every day. Um, Flat Earth, man, what a wonderful concept. Um, it's just awesome, dude. I mean, the fact that you have so many people, I mean, just normal people chat about this all the time and really believe it and are on board with it, right? It's
Yeah.
fascinating thing. We have to do flat Earth, but that once again, that's a lot of work. Um, uh, these um,
Oh yeah.
these little shows we're doing here so far, they really just what's in my head. I don't need to do any research. Um, so when we get into this kind of stuff, I'm going to have to research because I'm not a flat Earth person. Um, yeah, but it's fascinating, and of course, in this one, this image here, we're seeing actual water flowing over the edge, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. There'd be no water left. How does it get back up
Yeah,
if it just
yeah,
flows over the edge?
yeah. Anyway,
It looks cool.
it
Looks
does.
cool.
It's a beautiful artistic representation. Here's another one where it's all frozen on the edge. That's kind of cool too. Look
Hmm.
at that. Yeah, that's pretty.
That makes
Yeah.
more sense. That I could believe. But it
Yeah.
just flowing over like a waterfall would not happen.
No, no. What is this? Something's broke. Oh, they're talking about the schism. Yeah. The flat earthers are eating themselves, by the way, which it seems to happen with
Yes.
any community. But because they're in disagreement on some minor point, I don't know. But I like this one though. This one's my favorite so far.
He's a big
I
fan of the donut Earth.
Dude, I like it. Because it answers all
Donut.
those little problems. Flat Earth. The problem with the flat Earth people is they've run into trouble because they can't answer all the questions with their theory, so they keep adapting the
Hmm.
theory. It's just like the theory of black holes and gravity and all that kind of stuff. They don't. They're still and evolution is a big one because they
Yeah.
can't prove them. You see, and they keep having to add crap onto him. And look what frickin' Hawkins did, right? He took a P. I mean, and he's praised today. Stephen Hawkins is like a
Hmm.
hero or something. This dude and his group, they took a throwaway piece of scribbling work from frickin' Einstein, who told him, "Oh no, I was just working on it, but it's not mathematically feasible, and I was just a little doodle." He told them this,
Right.
but they took it anyway because he died very shortly after that, and they ran with it for what? 80 years, 70 years, 60 years, what the hell, how long it's been? And and every time they run into a problem, they add something. What was the first thing? Black holes, dark matter. They keep adding this crap because they can't make the math line up at all, right? But yet we praise Hawkins for taking the crumbs from Einstein, even though we told him not to. But yet he's a hero, right? Frickin' Hawkins. Goodness gracious.
Chester's all over that man's grave.
Well, dude, I mean, damn, man. I mean, people. It's the same thing with Neil deGrasse Tyson. These are people are front. Their faces. Their faces. They're not actual scientists. They're not real people, right? They're just there to sell stuff. A lot of them like that, right? Like Mahatma Gandhi, for instance. Gandhi was a bit of an ass, actually. He did a lot of bad stuff, including, diddling with little girls, if unless that
Hmm.
bothers you. It bothers me, right? And
Yeah.
also being good buddies with a guy called Adolf Hitler. Yeah, but these days, what is the image we have of Gandhi? Oh, well, that's right. It's that dude who did a movie, right? They don't talk about his time in Africa where he murdered lots of people, right? They don't talk about any of these things. It's all about the movie image of Gandhi, the face that is Gandhi, the symbol, not the actual man, right?
Right.
But anyway, that is way off tangent. But I like this donor
Well,
though. It's pretty cool.
well, it makes sense why Civilization Gandhi's the first to launch nukes.
That's right.
Perfect sense
It's
now.
perfect sense now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What let's bringing it back to Antarctica. Okay, let's say we're right here, and the treaty
Mm-hmm.
exists to protect something that they found,
Hmm.
whatever that might be. It
Mm-hmm.
could be resources, could be anything.
Yeah.
What do you guys think it would be? Like, if you had to pick the most realistic thing, why do they make it so no one can go exploit that continent? What are they protecting?
Well, and actually, for to answer that question, I have to go back to the comment I made earlier. Why did the Pope and the President of government officials from America, why did British prime ministers, Putin, and many other world leaders, why did they all go down to Antarctica real all sudden like? Why? Why? Especially the Pope, dude. That dude was ancient. He wasn't traveling well, but they dragged him down there anyway. This, in combination with many other things, mysteries with around Bird and all those kind of things like that, they don't help their case, right? Because it makes it very suspicious. You give me a good reason why all those world leaders were down in Antarctica together. What in the hell would they be down
Exactly.
there for? Why? Why wouldn't they be sitting in the frickin' Bahamas or somewhere in Switzerland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they in fricking Antarctica? Right? This is a really big glaring question. And more importantly, why did they let us know they were doing it? You know?
Yep.
And
It's strange.
it
Very
is strange.
strange.
Yeah.
But you didn't answer.
What do you think it was? What do you if they, let's say the Nazis, because they're the ones who built all the bases there. Let's say they found something. What did they find that made them want to build bases there?
Well, if you're a flat earther, they found the dome. I'm not a
Hmm.
flat earther, but it is a fascinating idea though. I love the fantasy of it. But
Hmm.
why? What do I think legitimately?
Hmm.
If it were resources, they wouldn't have to go to this length. They found something. They found
Yep.
something for sure. What exactly they found, I don't know. It's not resources because if it were just resources, no big deal. America would just claimed it, and as time went by, we probably would have cut off little pieces for people as we went along. But that's not what we
Right.
did. So they found something important, and unfortunately, we're all living under this. They've had a couple of meetings in the past. One was like in the late 40s. There was a 50s one. There's one in the 60s that's very famous, where they pulled in a bunch of world leaders and scientists, and they had these meetings, and they were talking about how to disseminate information and various things like that. And it was
Hmm.
soundly agreed in these meetings that if you tell the people they're too stupid, they will panic, right? And
Hmm.
therefore, the general consensus has been, especially from America's point of view, and America's been in charge ever since, right? That you can't tell the public anything because they're too stupid and they'll panic and cause trouble. All right.
Right.
Therefore, they found something that they felt would threaten their peace, their control.
Hmm.
I don't know what it is,
So
but they
take a
found it.
guess. If you had to guess, if someone put a gun to your head, what could it be? That is that huge that all these countries sign off on it.
Well, let's break it down in a logical way. All right. If they were
Hmm.
simply ancient ruins, it's not that big a deal. It's
Right.
so what? We found ruins in Antarctica. It messes with the science a little bit, but it's not worthy of some giant's cover up, right?
Hmm.
So it can't be just simply ruins. If they found some kind of energy source or something like that, I guess that makes a little bit more sense. But once again, why not just claim the technology and move on? Um,
Hmm.
Resources are recovered. If it was, actual presence of alien life, once again, covered up, move it along. But that's not what they've done. So, damn it. I guess the only real logical answer right now, since you put me on the spot, is they
Hmm.
they met and have been interacting with a group of people.
Yep. What do you think, Denali? What would you guess uh, is big enough that the entirety of the world's powers would all agree to keep it secret?
It would be the the civilization that survived the cataclysm. For somehow, some way, they were able to survive in Arctic until they were
Yeah.
refound by the global powers, maybe from Germany. They activated something, and that's why they had a base there.
Could be. I have
And
two
maybe,
theories. Oh,
and
go ahead. Go ahead. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I mean, can you imagine the rapid development? Centuries where we're going here, and then suddenly we happen to go into overdrive with
Oh, you mean like
technology.
we did with computers and stuff? Oh my.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Huge
And
technological boom over the last 50 years, like nothing humanity's ever experienced.
70.
right,
Yeah.
But yeah, 70 even. Yeah.
and that's about the time frame when
That,
World War I in Germany and all that
it's
other nice stuff
exactly the
happened.
time frame. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
And now it's slowing down.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But before you give your points here, Thundero,
Hmm.
Paul Hassett here says archaeological proof of biblical history. Now, there's certainly people in the world who would want to hide things like that, but there's
Hmm.
also an equal or even greater number who seek it out. So that
Yeah.
can't be the answer. It has to be. I mean, we have to logically peel it away. And unfortunately, the only thing that's come to my head right now, I mean, I haven't sat and contemplated this. Maybe I should. But the only thing that comes to my mind logically that makes sense for all the things that have happened is that they are interacting with a group that does not wish to be, publicly known, and that's
and
Right.
has
important
and
enough to
has
talk to.
and yeah, and it has the ability or influence to make it worth the
Something.
country's while
Yeah.
not to do so.
All right. I have two that I think
Hmm.
are one's less plausible but a little more fun, and the other's more
Hmm.
plausible. One is the less plausible one is they found what we would describe as the fountain of youth. They found some way to preserve life beyond the body's natural span in Antarctica, ancient technology from whoever it was that allowed these people to do that. And they found them, but what they found them was them in some sort of stasis. And they found the ability to do that with each other, or at least they found the rudimentary stuff that they could work on it and get to the point where they could activate it and do it and make themselves basically immortal. Um, that's the more fun answer. That's the more crazy answer. But most likely, what they found down there was some form of, like you guys were saying, access to, or maybe even direct contact with somebody that we're not supposed to talk to, that they don't want the common people to talk to. For whatever reason, whether it's they think we're too stupid, they think we'll panic, they'll throw religious turmoil into chaos, but something to the effect of that it would be so earth shattering for humanity, just as a whole, as a group, that they don't want us to talk to them because they're afraid of what would happen. So the more fun option, I think, is some sort of ancient technology that grants basically eternal life, the fountain of youth, as you would call, the ancients would have called it. Um, but it's probably the latter. The most logical thing is they found either a group of people that shouldn't be there, or they found a place where people can live, like we've talked about. That we could just a huge chunk of a continent that no one's ever really had any claim to by law,
Hmm.
and you can just live there. It's nice enough. It's geothermal or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Well, Matthew Gervais says the entrance to the Hollow Earth.
could be, maybe that's where all those people went. Maybe that's where the people who messed with our DNA and basically created humans, that's where they went. They went inside the earth. They couldn't exist on the surface anymore, so they went inside.
It's possible. And just to kind of tie into things a little bit for the fun of it. If we go back historically and we look at all these stories, not only do we see the same stories being told over and over again across the whole planet in different cultures,
Hmm.
what we do is we see a progression of stories over thousands of years, right? Thousands of years, and these progression we're going from the originals to their children to their grandchildren, progressing
Hmm.
from culture to culture throughout time. It's very interesting. It's literally, you can follow this soap opera for thousands of years, which in and of itself is odd. That is weird,
Right.
right? But then we do know that about 4,000 years ago, a little less, there was a big hubbubaloo that went on, and of course this
Hmm.
is happening with Akhenaten and the actual exodus out of Egypt and all that. That's a huge conversation. But that was a time of war across this planet. Something big was going on, something huge. We don't know. But here's the interesting thing: that soap opera, that drama of stories, stopped, and
Hmm.
everything after that was just retelling of the same story. And as every generation came by, it became more watered down and more fantastical. It ended.
And
Something happened.
right after that, humanity secured 100% dominion over the planet,
That's right.
because that's around the time we started to really build actual civilizations.
That's right.
I mean, we had some, but all over the place. They all started popping up. Boom, boom, boom,
Yeah,
boom,
but
boom, boom,
see,
boom.
the difference is the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, etc. They, in all their stories, the gods are walking with them. They're
Yep.
right next to them. They're not talking about spiritually. They're talking about they're in that building over there. That's their house. That's their personal temple. I see them walking down the streets, right? They're literally the gods are walking with them. But when we come into the Greeks, now all of a sudden the gods are this distant thing. And then the
Yeah,
Romans, they're
metaphorical.
very generic. And then the Christians
Right.
is completely, fanciful, right?
Right.
And so something, a little bit less than 4,000 years ago, something happened, big time on this planet, and it might well have affected their dominion, as you had said, if we want to go down this route. And I say,
Yeah.
why not?
I think it's perfectly feasible. Let's say this civilization existed. Something happened to the Earth 12,000 years ago that changed the way the Earth is entirely. And they had adapted to more of that environment, but they had the technology and things to survive even with the changes because they were advanced. Like, we'd probably be okay unless it was some super cataclysm. Humanity'd probably survive. Um, Most things that could happen to the planet, unless it was like a complete wipeout event. Um,
Their numbers
so
are small, though.
right, and their numbers would have been smaller, probably by choice. But so say that something happened to their, maybe even their genetics, and they couldn't just stay in the places they stayed before.
Well,
They just
now
couldn't. They couldn't
it's
physically do it.
very interesting you mentioned that, actually,
Hmm.
because this is from Sitchin translations, actually. And of course, as we know, Sitchin certainly put a modern parlance onto his translation, but all he did was translate. Understand that. Okay, he
Hmm.
didn't create his fanciful ideas. He did create the Book of Enki, which is a fantasy, but everything else is just translation, is what he did. But here's the interesting thing: around that time, when they were having a lot of trouble, and actually in their stories, they sing a lot of them were returning back to their home, right? And they had
Right.
canceled the any other gods coming because they had discovered that the ones that had been there since the beginning, say Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, Ninchita, these guys, they had discovered that they were aging,
Hmm.
and they considered the planet to be some kind of, like a plague or something. There was some effect of the planet that was causing the age, and they panicked, and
See.
they, in essence, quarantined the planet, so no one else was
See.
allowed to come in. So
And what would you do if you were aging? You would try and stop it, right? Especially if you're a species that
sure,
just didn't do that for whatever reason. You had beaten that. You don't age anymore. One way you stop that would be suspended animation. Maybe that's what they found in Antarctica. They found them there, waiting for their people to come back and fix them.
well, the problem
Um,
with that is, based upon the aging rates and stuff that they were talking about in those stories, 4,000
mhm.
years is nothing. It's still but then maybe
Well, they could have just been trying to get ahead of it. They knew what was coming. And obviously, if these people were as smart as we think they are, they had some foresight, right? So maybe they just tried to get ahead of it, and they thought,
well
4,000, like you said, to them, 4,000 years isn't a long time, especially if they were immortal. I mean, that's time loses a lot of meaning when you don't have to worry about death.
well here
So
here's an interesting
could
little
be.
take on that, though, as far as visualization of culture.
Hmm.
Now, Ninhursag, or Hathor, or I forget what she's called in India, but the cow lady, right? The reason they don't kill cows and eat cows is because of her, right? She's the founder of their
Hmm.
culture. But nevertheless, Ninhursag, it mentions in it, because like I said, it's like a soap opera over time. It's very interesting that these gods would be following culture for thousands of years across the planet, and the cultures are telling the stories of them at that time. It's very fascinating, right? That I don't see
Right.
anybody talking about that aspect of it, right? But that is literally what's happening. Over thousands of years, we're seeing these family stories being continually told, not just repeated.
Hmm.
It isn't until after that 4,000-year mark that we see repeating coming into, and of course, watering down coming into play. But when we first meet Ninhursag, she's rather young. She's brilliant, intelligent. But in the early stories, she's very young. She's very beautiful and very desirable. Matter of fact, so much so her brother really wanted to get a piece of that. Um,
Oh
uh,
God.
but nevertheless, as time went by, her brothers had been given territory and
Hmm.
control, and she was like, "Father, I'm here too? How come I don't have my own thing?" And he said, "Okay, fine, fine, fine." He gave her the lands to the east, which causes the Indus Valley in India. And as time went by, and they were aging, because it's actually the story with her that they're telling us about how they're aging, because one of her classmates that she went to school with had come to the planet to visit, and he noticed how much older she was than him, and because they were the same age, and that's when they started investigating it, right? But if you look in now with Ninhursag, even with some of the Egyptian references, but particularly the Indian references, she is the old cow, right? She is this
Hmm.
old, gray, wrinkled lady, right? So it literally shows a progression of time with them that, and as far as the stories are concerned, should not have happened.
Right.
So that is an
So we're
interesting
the
little point.
we're the planet of death for the gods.
It seems so.
We
Maybe.
kill
Could
our.
be something about our electromagnetic field or the radiation of the planet
Some.
just messes them all up. But think about this though. Like we were talking about, there was a massive technological boom right around the time that
Mhm.
we discovered. Discovered Antarctica, but you know what I mean. They started exploring Antarctica, really exploring it. If they did find something down there from some sort of advanced technology, right? They wouldn't know how to use it right away unless someone was there to show them. So maybe all we're seeing is them reverse engineering some of it. And then as they do that, they get more advanced and more advanced and more advanced.
Yeah, but
Maybe they're getting close to where they finally got enough knowledge they can turn it on. They can figure
yeah,
out how to turn this thing on.
but once again, this kind of goes against the logic argument, right?
Hmm.
Because if they simply found tech, we'll just pull it out of there, even if it's
Well, what
big.
if they can't?
Well, I
What
mean,
if maybe they can't? If it's attached to other things, maybe it's attached
the
to
core.
actual people that are down there. If they can't, or they
But
met somebody who is down there, what they won't share, they wouldn't share the secrets with them, so they wouldn't let them move it, and maybe they stole some of it or something, and they reversed engineered that. It's all possible.
And now let me make one little other reference, which may seem unconnected, but I think it is connected. There's stories from long ago of,
Hmm.
I think it's three stones that fell from Earth, so fell from heaven. Sorry, and these stones are considered extremely magical. All right. Now,
Right.
one of the stones, of course, we supposedly still have, and is sitting under the throne in Britain, right? This stone has been in the hands of the Celts for a very long time. It's supposed to be very powerful, very magical, and they have guarded it jealously. And like I said, it's literally there's a stone underneath the throne of Queen Elizabeth, and you probably don't know that, but you might ask, why is there a stupid stone underneath it? Well, it's a good question. Why? The second one, of course, fell more toward the Middle East, and of course we see it all the time. It's in Mecca, and they walk around
Hmm.
the damn thing all the time, right? The third stone was said to fall to the south and was jealously guarded by the gods.
Hmm.
So
There you go.
interesting.
There you go. Yeah. The reality is, they did find something. There's something down there. Whether it could just be resources, but it doesn't make sense why they wouldn't try to exploit that. Um, it could be as simple as it's just so crazy cold they don't want anyone going down there to protect people.
Yeah,
I think that's
nonsense.
stupid. Yeah, because they don't usually care about protecting people otherwise, especially not every country on the planet or
Besides, I
all the
thought it
main
was
ones.
melting.
Yeah, yeah, it's supposedly warming up. Um, so there's something going on. Why would the world leaders, the real world leaders, the Pope and Obama and such, Putin, these are the real world leaders. These are the people who would really have power in this world,
And they're the ones that went.
political power anyway.
Right.
Yeah, why would they go down there? What? Who? It's almost like they were summoned by something.
Yes, it seems they
Uh,
were summoned. Yeah.
why would that specific group of extremely powerful men all go down to Antarctica to get like basically together? Like that doesn't
and
make any sense.
and like kind of in a hurry
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Now, Nick W., you mentioned the Infinity Stones, and how wonderful you did, because boy, you give me an opportunity. Thank you, sir. You guys have to keep in mind a lot of these stories that are coming out of the comic books that we love are coming out of the 60s and 70s, right? And
Yep.
you think what we're sitting here talking about is new? It's
Yep.
not. This conversation has been going on a long time. Of course, a lot of these Eric von Daniken, yeah, Sitchin, as I already mentioned, many people had writings in the 60s and 70s, guys, and these conversations have been going on for a long time. Jack Kirby's The Elder Gods, or the New Gods, the Return of the Jedi. Excuse me, not Return of the Jedi, Star Wars in general. A lot of
Hmm.
these stories are based upon the ancient Sumerian Mesopotamian stories. It was all the rage at that time, and it's continued, right?
Yep.
So a lot the Infinity Stones are most absolutely talking about these stones I'm talking about, dude. Absolutely. And they were
Okay.
taking from that. They were not created out of nothing. This is another interesting thing. We were talking about how the eyes worked earlier. Well, let's talk a little bit about how the brain works, right? Here's a
Hmm.
simple little fact that maybe you know or maybe you don't. Humans cannot create new things. It is impossible for the human brain to do that because it doesn't work like that. There is no such thing as actual invention. There is adaptation, right? You
Hmm.
cannot create something beyond what you know. That's just the reality.
Right.
Your brain does not actually go from A to Z. I know this is a very common thing. They say, "Ooh, that's how you know genius." It's nonsense. It doesn't work. The brain does not work like that. We do not
Hmm.
go from A to Z. We go from A to B. And now some
Hmm.
people do it brilliantly. And often, a lot of the coolest inventions we have were found by accident because they were trying to do other stuff and they stumbled upon
Right.
it, right? But the human brain cannot create new ideas, actually. You only can create off of what you know. It's about combinate.
Right.
It's about the blocks you have in your hand and what you can build with them. It's not about creating a new block, right?
Right. A good example of that is no one here could create a color.
No.
Couldn't do it. We couldn't fathom what a new color would be
Although I
because we
can
can't
take
perceive.
colors and make something new.
Right. You can blend colors to make a new
That's
color,
right.
but to make a brand new prime color, we
No,
can't do that.
it's
There's no
impossible.
way for us to even fathom it, really. What would it look like?
Yeah,
How do you
but I mean,
describe it?
it just that's an important thing to keep in mind about how the human brain works because it explains quite a few things if you think about it. And of course, the Infinity Stones are not a unique idea; they're taken off of just like all those things out of 60s and 70s. And of course, it all laid into the 80s, right? Because it all built up. These guys in this, even earlier in the the earlier pulp stuff, but in the 60s and 70s, they really put these things out. And then the 80s, they took and refined them. And that's why
Hmm.
the 80s is so badass, is because everything was refined from these initial ideas that people were throwing around and all these cool ancient things that we had kind of forgotten that were all the rage at that time because of certain writers. And the 80s became that quintessence of creation, right? And
Right.
that's why the 80s is what it is.
And
And
that's
yes, I
why
did use the
90s
word
incorrect. So.
quintessence. Deal with it.
Can he spell that word though? That's the question.
I can. Damn it.
And that's yeah, and that's why the 90s and now currently there's no good stories because
No.
there's no refinement to be done because you can't refine crap.
Well, until we've stumbled across something new, I'm sure. But Big Daddy Soybean says the Romans exceeded in mechanical and archaeological knowledge, but the Greek sure was theoretically advanced. Now, it's interesting you say that, Big Daddy, because actually the opposite is true. The Greeks
Hmm.
were far more mechanically and architecturally advanced, way more than the Romans. And you know who was better than them? The Egyptian. And you know who was better than them? The Mesopotamians. The further back in
Yep.
time you go, the better they were at doing stuff, which in itself is
Especially with
a
masonry,
conundrum.
it's unbelievable how precise they were able to be
You know,
as
yeah.
masons.
If you go and study it, the Romans were very rough. They were very
Hmm.
militaristic, if you would, or even Spartan.
Yep.
The Greeks were far more advanced than the Romans, dude. I know
It's
people
one of the ways they
misunderstand
were
that.
able to be such great conquerors because they wouldn't worry. They weren't hung up as much on it. Now they obviously got it to work, and they got it to work as best they could. But they had, like you said, a more military style where
They
it just
did.
has to work.
They did.
As
But
long as it works
they
and
were
works
very
well,
plain
they're fine.
about it. They were very
Yeah.
plain about it. I will say one thing that the Romans did that was an advancement, though, is they created a type of concrete that, when
Hmm.
mixed with or sat in salt water, it became harder and stronger over time. So
Yep.
Roman concrete was in many ways superior to some of the stuff that come from the past, but this is an argument because there's an interesting little shift that's going on in archaeology that I don't know if you guys are aware of, but for a long time they were talking about how humans moved all these big stones. Well, now because of a lot of the studies coming out of South America, we see that the stones look like they're melted. But
Hmm.
the theories going on now is not that they're melted; it's just a form of concrete, and a really good form of concrete that over time has become stone, right? So these humans
Interesting.
didn't drag anything. Some things they did. They certainly had certain stones, we know that. But the majority of the actual roughing in stone was done with concrete, not actual stone. It's a very interesting direction it's heading with that, and who knows where it'll go. But it is fascinating. Now we do know that they also cut big stone and they moved big stone too, but most of that was like for centerpieces or hold major weight bearing things or etc. Like the pyramid, for instance. The majority of the pyramid is made up of a very generic stone. It's just certain
Hmm.
areas here or there that have to have either a strong support or have some kind of uh, use or meaning, because a lot of those interior stones in the pyramids, they are made of very specific type of stones which we know are sonically and energetically reactive stone, right?
Correct.
So
Which is another interesting idea that we've talked about before. Why? Why is it like that? Because we know those weren't tombs. That's just not true. They
well,
weren't
they never
tombs.
found a
They may have
body
been
in
used
any
as
of them.
tombs later. They
No,
weren't
no, no.
built for
We've
to
never
be
found a
tombs.
body in any pyramid, dude. That's
Yeah.
never.
So what were they built for? Were they built as I honestly think they were built as some sort of either power generator or power storage or power transference
Well,
system
why don't
of
we
some degree.
why
Some
don't we pay attention what the ancients say it was built for? Because they tell us very directly, and this kills me, dude. It kills me. These stupid historians, right? They go out and they cherry pick out of the same damn story things that they like, and they call the rest of it nonsense. It's disgusting, dude.
yeah.
The Egyptians tell us exactly what it's for. And has anyone here heard what it's for? Anybody? No, no,
Go ahead.
because it's
Mm-mm.
written. It's frickin' written down, right? They say
Mhm.
very clearly it was a communication device to their home, to their place, to heaven, to space.
Hmm.
It was a way for them to communicate. It was a command center for the gods. I
Interesting.
mean, to put it in modern parlance, but it was a communication device. They say very clearly what it is. And it's a nope, we're not going to listen to that. Oh, that's fantasy. But then again, from the same story, they'll take someone's name or someone's history or something like that, and they're like,
Well,
"Oh, this person lived here and here," and they're writing a damn history book, and they'll cut out everything around it, right?
right. Well, it's interesting they'll because they'll admit they could have been used for religious rituals and things like this.
I'm sure they were, especially by later people. I imagine they were.
Yeah, but think about it for a second. If what's a prayer? You're communicating with the gods or God above. Okay, that fits in perfectly with what they said. but they meant it literally. Maybe they didn't mean in a spiritual or metaphorical or whatever sense. Maybe they meant it literally. They were using these places to communicate with what they perceived as their home or where they're from or their gods or whatever.
Why not?
Um,
Because they
yeah, why
said
not?
that.
Why does it have to be
Well,
metaphor?
well,
Why?
they said they took all the devices out because it couldn't be left because they had a pyramid war over controlling the territory. So they took all the mechanics out. They say that very clearly in the
Hmm.
story, by the way. And if you go look in the pyramids, there's stuff missing. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
there should have been something here. And it looks like their mechanical things literally been pulled out. Oh my God, they said that in the story, right? How
Well,
interesting, right?
they're still finding chambers in the pyramids.
They are. Yeah.
They won't let anybody see into. Like they won't let them send a drone in and stuff like that to see what's in there. So
Well, Hawass
it's
is out
very
now.
interesting.
Hawass was a very
Yeah.
corrupt man, and he's been booted. And the new dude that's in charge over there, he's much more open to this stuff, and we're starting to see some movement go forward on that actually.
Good.
But yeah, it is very interesting. But it just it kills me that we will cherry pick things out of stories and then throw the rest of it away, and it's not appropriate. It's not right. At least inform the people of what they
Right.
thought was true, right? At least do that, but
Exactly.
they won't. They refuse to do that, and in and of itself is that makes it a question, right? And the thing with the pyramids particularly, and of course we were talking about a pyramids shaped object anyway down in Antarctica, and there's actually several of them, I
Hmm.
think. But the pyramids in Egypt, in Giza, particularly, are very special things, of course. When we look at the ancient stories and what they talked about it, it was actually used for lots of things. There was community around it. They did have, a reverence type of thing set up. Temples. The human slaves certainly had temples there. They would said that in the stories. And
Hmm.
with later times, they would always show reverence or they would take claim. Like, for instance, why do they say that Gozer is the one who created the Giza pyramid? What evidence do they have for this? Oh, well, they have evidence that sitting in front of the Sphinx, not the pyramid,
Right.
the Sphinx, he put a little plaque showing reverence to this amazing construction. So not even
Hmm.
and claiming it as his. And he didn't say he built it. He just said this is an awesome thing, and I am the pharaoh, and therefore it is mine. That's it.
Hmm.
Doesn't say anything about building nothing. Matter of fact, the way it's written, it's quite the opposite. It's something that he found, right?
Right.
So
Which is interesting because we know for certain that there have been times where you could barely see them from the
oh,
stands
sure,
and things.
Napoleon.
You would go past it and you wouldn't even know it was there if you didn't know what to look for. So
Actually,
it's when stuff like that happens, it's really hard to get dates accurate. It's almost
it is.
impossible, in
It is.
fact.
Yeah. And actually, if you go and you go look at the records of Napoleon and his conquests,
Hmm.
there's a lot of he had brought many illustrators with him, and
Hmm.
when they traveled around like Egypt or all the places they went, the illustrators created lots of illustrations because that was their job. And of course, I don't know how many volumes are, but there are a whole bunch of books that have all those illustrations in them. And the ones in Egypt are very interesting. You can only see the very top of the head of the Sphinx, and
Right.
just lots of little stuff because they were going all over the place. And of course, we know they figured out how to take big old stone objects and move them up rivers and stuff. And the British did the same. I mean, you do realize that Egypt has been raped.
Yeah, repeatedly,
Yeah.
unfortunately, for literally thousands of years by different
Okay, but I do have a
invaders.
more important question.
No, you.
Will
Uh-oh.
all this Mountain Dew I drink make me impotent?
Yes.
Ah,
Huh?
crap.
What did he say? I totally missed. I heard impotent. I don't.
He's asking if Mountain Dew will make him impotent.
Oh, absolutely, dude. Don't drink that stuff. It's dangerous.
Oh well, it helps wake me up. So,
I
thumbs
told
up,
you.
boys.
Dude, it
Eat
is
an
really
apple.
late in the day, dude. It's like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon for you, dude.
I need my 8 hours sleep, Chester.
What are you, like a 12-year-old girl?
Yes.
He's still a growing boy
Dude,
at
I
27
sleep.
years old.
I have slept an average
big
5,
boy.
occasionally 6 hours since I was like,
Oh,
high school
oh my
kid,
god,
dude.
la di da.
What do you
Yeah,
mean
but
lying?
in my defense, I'm really lazy.
This is true.
Is that a
This
defense?
This is true. Nick W. He says they had a pyramid war, Chester 2019. I love how he likes to quote me. It's quite funny, dude. Actually, they had several. It wasn't just one. Good reading.
It's
by the way.
interesting. All these people fighting over these supposedly tombs. Why? Why would people fight over a tomb?
Well,
Who
they
cares?
weren't.
Why would you fight over a big chunk of rock that somebody threw up? There's obviously something more significant to that they knew about that we don't.
Now,
Could you imagine? Like that'd be like fighting over the Eiffel Tower. Let's go have a war over the Eiffel Tower. I want it. What?
Now,
Nobody's gonna do that.
Added, I've read many of those things myself, and as you guys know, I do some translation of particularly Mesopotamian stuff. And Stitchin had done translations and various things, but he also had he speculated a little bit here or there. And one of his speculations, although there are a couple of little stories that kind of hint at this, so it's not complete speculation. It's more theory, I guess. But before that, these pyramids were also built as a kind of a visual guideline for ships coming in from space, right? And I don't know if I agree with that or not, but it's an observation, I guess.
Could be.
Alright, well, Model V said it's definitely a conspiracy. Booster should be impotent to keep him from spreading his genes. This is a conspiracy.
It is. We need to put a little bit of hair on Noah Booster's chest here, so he can go out here and rabbit up all these girls and spread his seed as far and wide as he possibly can.
I have a very hairy chest, Chester. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I have it actually crawling up to my neck and as a little snail trail.
It's a metaphor. It's not.
That's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Like someone put too much hair on me. Probably aliens.
I love it when Booster shows up to TFT because of course he's funny, and this show we don't do a lot of comedy, but he absolutely has zero to add to this conversation. It's really.
What do you mean?
Oh, Booster! I've told you how to wake yourself up. You have to eat an apple and get up and move around, and you'll be awake within a half hour. Be wide awake.
Okay, I drank some Mountain Dew and I went from my bed to my chair. Does that count?
That's bad sugar. You need good sugar. You need something to get your kickstart.
You know what,
and an apple's actually great. It's better than
a cup of Fundaro? You know what, Fundaro? You're good sugar.
Oh,
Ooh,
wow.
Can I lick you? Lick you.
Whoa. You have to ask my wife.
Yeah, no, it's also. Oh, okay, I'll ask her. I said hello to her the other day, and she probably got you slapped, but that's okay. Anyway, Sasquatch. Yes, he is the new Sasquatch. So Paul has a question for you, Booster. He says, "So are you in the Pacific Northwest, Sasquatch?"
I'd have to Google that.
No,
why would you have to Google that?
No,
You're nowhere near. You're nowhere near the Pacific Northwest of anything
the opposite
at
direction.
all.
Literally. All right.
I knew that.
That's funny.
Now,
anyway,
people trying to confuse me with maps, that's a conspiracy.
Yeah, we won't do that. Anyway, guys, we are 2 hours into the show. Now, of course, we could sit here and talk for forever, but this is an early day for me, so I have to go to work because it's my Monday, actually. But these are a lot of fun. I love these TFTs, and it looks like you guys are enjoying them too. Keep in mind, this is all in good fun. We're just speculating, theorizing, and having a good time. None of us over here are any cult members. Well, except for maybe Booster. But hopefully being a member of a cult will get him laid eventually, that's kind of a positive thinking Booster. But anyway, so we're going to go ahead and get ourselves out of here. But Thundera, you have any closing statements?
Well, I don't have any closing statements per se. I just think that this is a very interesting topic, Antarctica. It's very weird how, like we said, it's very weird how all these countries agree that no one's allowed there. With force, by the way, with military force, they agree. And it's just very interesting. Always keep your mind open to this kind of stuff, because when things like that don't make sense happen, when all these supposed enemies agree on the same thing, there's definitely something going on. It's definitely something more than they're telling you. They're lying to you if they're telling you it's nothing.
True. Denali?
I think whenever we find out what's going on, it's going to change everything we know about the world, whether it's for positive or negative. That's up to be determined what is found out. But otherwise, it was a very interesting talk. I mean, we do try to point out some facts about it, and hopefully the facts make sense. And when it doesn't, it kind of gives us more impetus to ask more questions about what's going on.
It does. It does. Booster, would you like to make a comment about Antarctica?
Oh, it's really cold. I wouldn't go there.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to mind. I thought you were going to be more clever,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
it's cold.
yeah,
It's cold.
yeah.
But yeah, I know, dude. You came in at the very end. Thanks for coming, though, dude. Nice to see you.
Yeah, of course.
My take on it is very. My last point is this: we're always seeing the conspiracy theory community talking about this or that, and several times in the past we've had the topic come up of public reveal, meaning the governments of the world coming forward and saying this is real, meaning aliens or what have you. This has been talked about many, many times, but I have to tell you what, because I do pay attention to a lot of these things because I think they're extremely entertaining. I love them, right? They're fun. I don't take most of them too seriously, but I enjoy them, right? And one thing I can tell you that is definitely going on this year in particular, they are all abuzz. They think this is the year. They really do. That there's going to be a big reveal coming from the government, some governments or some joint group of governments coming together and announcing something big. Now, I don't know. I've heard them say this before, but I've never seen them so hyped. That community is all aflame. They think this is the year. They think this is the year that the reveal comes. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it would be fascinating to see if it did. But I don't know. I kind of think a reveal would take away the control that they've been working so hard from when they introduced that TV, and which has evolved into YouTube, the absolute domination of the human mind that it is. But
That's
anyway,
true.
thank
It's
you.
interesting. Imagine if it was of all the presidents to do it under, it would be perfect if it was Trump.
I don't
They're
know
going to
if
reveal the great secret of Antarctica with President Trump there. That'll be fun to watch.
they seem to be thinking more UN than him actually. But who knows, dude? It's fascinating. We love doing this show. It is so look how easily and freely we spoke for 2 hours, right? It just comes out of your mind because that's the cool thing about conspiracy theories. There's a kernel of truth, and then that makes you want to go to an understanding, because the logical mind wants to understand, and that's the great thing about it. So,
Yes.
guys, okay, all right, guys, thank you very much. There's a lot of fun. Definitely come back and check us out tomorrow on the of course we do our normal show.
Comics news today.
Comics News Today, but actually all over on John Dillard Game the System. I think you call it Dillard Draws now. But I am running a D&D game over there, and if you're interested in checking that out, it's kind of cool because it's basically the whole team are artists. So everything is arted up like crazy. It's awesome. But and then, of course, on Bugbear's Basement, we are continuing the Marvel superhero role-playing game, which I'm doing very old school, without any maps or miniatures, just it's all visuals and imagination. So if you're interested in that kind of role playing and seeing how it works out, see how these systems work, come on by and have some fun with us. But beyond that, Denali, take us out, dude.
All right. Well, as always, thank you for joining us. Hope to see you tomorrow for Comics News Today. Join us later afterwards on Dillard's Draw for that D&D game, and Chester showing his storytelling abilities. But as always, your perception shapes your reality, so always make it a good one.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Later,
Aloha.
guys.
Bye.